Good evening. I'd like to call to order the business meeting portion of our meeting tonight for the Tacoma School Board of Directors, Thursday, December 5th, 2019. Would you all please rise for the flag salute? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
General Counsel, would you please call the roll?
President Hines.
Here.
Vice President Winskill.
Here.
Director Leon.
Here.
Director Cobb. Here. And Director Bombright. Here. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. We have one action item tonight, item number 5, board action item 5.1, appointing members to the for and against committees for the Neighborhood School Improvement and Safety Upgrades Bond on the February 11th, 2020 ballot.
The Executive Director of Communications recommends the Board of Directors appoint Mayor Victoria Woodards, CEO of the Tacoma Pierce County Chamber of Commerce Tom Pearson, and Educator Emeritus Willie Stewart to the For Committee, and Robert Hill to the Against Committee for the Neighborhood School Improvements and Safety Upgrades Bond on the February 11th, 2020 ballot.
I move approval.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments? Director Cobb.
Were there any other folks who came forward wanting to be a part of the against?
No, we issued a news release, promoted it through our social media platforms, and no one else came forward.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? And my understanding, the three that are writing the For piece will work together to put one common piece together for the For.
Yes,
is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Last chance. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries 5-0. That will end the business meeting. We'll now move into item number 6, the Committee of the Whole, and 6.1, Health and Safety of Students and Staff, Policy and Strategy. So we have had a Committee of the Whole to begin unpacking that priority of health and safety of staff and students. We've had one study session to begin to identify what some of those potential opportunities are within that category. At the last study session, we asked the superintendent to provide us with a framework, and at the last business meeting, she presented us with a template to begin to think about what those priority items would be categorically and what some of the benchmarks, data that we would use, action plans, timelines. And so this evening we have an opportunity for each of the 5 of us to share priorities, and then for us to collectively reach consensus. I would say reasonably, probably 3 priority items, depending upon their nature, would be reasonable. We can negotiate that with the superintendent. I think any more than 3 probably is challenging, but the idea for tonight is to share those ideas and see where we are individually and collectively, and then at the end of the evening be able to provide the superintendent with some direction on those identified priorities and next steps and timeline. Sound good? Mm-hmm. Any questions or comments? Do you have a volunteer to go first with their priorities? Director Leon, and then Director Bombright.
So I've sent them electronically to all of you, but I'll just for the public that's out there. I think that a lot of our topics that you gave us to look through strategically kind of naturally coalesced into groups that could be tackled together to improve the health and safety of students and staff. So I'll just start kind of with, I had 3 that I had proposed, and I don't know how much detail we want to go through right now, but I'm just going to give the kind of the highlights of it. So bullying was one that I had proposed, and I'm not going to go through the kind of our whole structure that we had with the area that it's in, but physical and mental health. So data points I think would be, and the superintendent's team can tell us if these are data points that are reasonable to get, and they give us some examples. So numbers of referrals, bullying referrals would be one data point, but I think there are others that Director Bonbright had in her also topic for this that I'll let her go through. Benchmarks of dropping 20% over 2 years in bullying referrals, I think is reasonable, though I'd like to see a higher drop than that. I think that the things we have in line to help us with this are the council of the experts that are in the schools already, the principals, the counselors, the psychologists that are in that school, in each school. Professional development, of course, expanding upon that, whether it's materials we already have, or do we go out and look for new materials that can help train our staff and students better. The social emotional learning already comes to the surface as something that really is geared to help us with this topic already, and it actually will help us with many of these things that we'll discuss tonight, I think. Of course, partnering with regional stakeholders and folks that are in our community is going to be important for anything we do on all of these topics. So comprehensive mental health, Greater Lakes, are just one of the quick, big players that will help us with those things. So I'll try to be briefer because we could all be here for a while. If
We have
all
90
go through
minutes.
this.
You're doing great.
Mental health, I think there we could really coalesce the suicide, anxiety, depression, and there was one topic of social emotional concern. I think really all that wraps into those three things. So anxiety, you could kind of watch this as a continuum of anxiety, but not always doesn't lead to depression. Those can be independent of each other, but many times they occur together. And then, of course, the worst thing we see from that would be suicide. But then we also see substance abuse that can occur from this, and domestic violence that can occur from both of those anxiety and depression problems if they go kind of unresolved. So data points, student attendance, discipline referrals, potentially using the Healthy Youth Survey that's done by the state, and a potential use of health surveys that can be more targeted for our students. And we've had an unofficial offer from the health department to help us around those topics, because they're experts in discussing health, mental health and physical health. But we could also incorporate comprehensive mental health in those, in potentially a health survey that could really kind of dig deeper into where students are currently, and then we'd have to find a way to anonymously and a way to kind of either, if we pick to give that survey again, that tool to the same students, that would be the most ideal way to see if there's improvement, but that is hard to do with privacy. So it may need to be cohorts of people that we study as we talk about it really throughout all of our ideas. I think we have to determine how much can be done individually, student to student, and follow them that way. Those are sometimes the best way to do double-blind randomized trials, but that's not something I think we can realistically probably try to pull off in any school district. So benchmarks 15% drop in days missed in 2 years, I think is a reasonable thing to shoot for. Decreased depression, anxiety, severity, incidence, and how do you measure that? Well, we'll get to that here in action steps too, but increased school engagement. I think if we can find a way to measure school engagement in clubs, groups, teams, not only in school but outside of school, this is hard to do. So it's hard to do it even in school, but there's plenty of good things that happen outside of schools with groups and clubs that kids are involved in. And I think there are vendors and products out there that exist to try to help us with those things. And I don't know if the things that we use currently are robust enough to have that. So proposed action steps would be possible things: awareness of the campaign to students, parents. This could be a campaign around anxiety, depression, education, prevention. The basic things: robocalls, emails, texts to parents and kids. A website change potentially, but really has to come. Those are kind of probably the peripheral things. It's really the training of the staff and the integration of staff members, getting to know students and somehow identifying who those students that are at risk, but you can't always tell who's at risk, but having a person that's can connect to that student. The student can say, I am close with such and such a person. Everybody can name someone in the school that they feel that they can confide in. That's been an approach used by some districts. So proposed action, there's a few action steps here. School-based health centers also would really improve this. This is high school-based health centers. They do exist in middle schools. We have ours at Oakland currently. So the idea of expanding that with support from the city and other health institutions to help pay for that, which we have a arrangement right now with Multicare, and it was with PLU, but not currently with PLU. Delayed high school start times will also improve many of these symptoms of anxiety and depression. We've talked about that at length, so I won't belabor that right now. Parents registering their children, somehow understanding who has anxiety and depression. We don't know all those numbers. That's not something we measure. So understanding how we would get that information, it would be difficult. Which kids have diabetes? We kind of know the type 1 diabetics. We'd have no idea who has type 2 in the schools. It would have to be, this would have to be information brought to us by the parent. Same thing could be said for asthma, ADHD, and seizure disorders, those type of things. Peer counselors, training them, so those are other student counselors. I'm not aware if we have that currently, but that's been done in some districts. Increasing the counselor ratio in FTE. I didn't go into the timelines, but these timelines would be so 1 year for that, potentially in the next budget if that's something that we wanted to do. And increase our partner agencies that I talked about before. And then the last priority I had was physical health, and in that, including obesity, diabetes, nutrition, data points against Healthy Kids surveys, understanding who has those diagnoses is going to be very difficult to do again. We don't measure kids' BMIs in general, I don't think, in schools, and that could be something that could be ostracizing to some people. So if that is something that is done and measured, it has to be done in a sensitive way. Improving nutrition of quality of the meal, the taste of the meal, so the more kids are eating it. We have undernourished kids. We have more overnourished kids with empty calories. So getting healthier meals to these kids. Benchmarks again, 5% drops in diabetes in 2 years. But how do you measure that? You have to have parental input on that with regard to if someone is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That's something that their physicians know about, but everyone in the school district is not going to know someone who's a type 2 diabetic. So we probably know about the type 1s because they're the ones getting the insulin. So 10% drop in BMIs, again, difficult if we don't know how to really measure those BMIs. That's body mass index, in case.
Yeah.
Okay, just make sure everybody. That's
I think everybody knows these days.
okay.
Maybe.
10% increase in meals sold. 10% increase in meals eaten. How do we measure what's sold and what's eaten, what goes in the trash? That's not easy to do. And action steps, again, the principals, the nurses, the counselors, nutritionists. I think we were still looking for a nutritionist. I'm not sure if we hired one yet.
We have
We hire
We have one. All right, excellent. And then public education on this, a campaign around these things, just like I mentioned from the last option, the same ideas around how we educate the public. And it's not just us, right? We have a health department, we have other agencies that can help us do that. School-based health centers, again, delayed school start times, again, also have been shown to help with diabetes and obesity. And the health curriculum, I didn't mention earlier, but really that, we have a pretty robust health curriculum that can help us with all of these topics, engaging that to be fully implemented and rolled out to all the schools at all the grade levels, because it is tiered to be discussed at different grade levels with different different curricula that is age appropriate. So I'll wait for the rest of my comments after I hear from everyone else.
Thank you for sharing. Director
Okay.
Bombright.
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, this is, just jumping on and into this, I feel kind of privileged that the last few board meetings and committees as a whole have been listening to you guys talk on this issue. So I learned a lot. And then I went to the WASDA meeting, and actually some of the side groups and some of the trainings and whatever, I also went to include some of the same conversation, especially around the mental health issue. And so I learned a lot really fast, and really was actually quite encouraged that when I submitted mine to Tanya, and then I saw what
Director Leon had put it in, and it was very aligned. So I thought that was, either I'd been listening pretty well, or we've been going to the same sessions. But anyway, so I had in a little bit of different order and then a different twist. So my priority number one was the mental, well, it's the suicide prevention, anxiety, depression, social, emotional one. And I kind of said that's both physical and mental, but obviously it's mental health, but it's physical health as well. And the data points, I'm somewhat guessing on some of these, but, obviously student attendance is important, but the number of incidences of self-harm actions or attempted self-harm actions that are noted or reported would be one documentation. Another would be the number of parent requests for social emotional assistance or intervention to assist their child. Not sure if that happens or if that's possible, but I learned last time about the Health Youth Survey, so the last presentation, so thanks for that, I put that in. Also, I gather there's some other youth surveys that we might be able to tap into, Department of Health, maybe the county does it. I'm just sort of trying to, there must be other ones than just the one we know about. And then also, I also thought of the idea of documenting the engagement in school-based activities, because if you're depressed, you're less likely to be joining. So I don't know how we would do that, but maybe that's one way. Benchmarks would be significant reduction in reported suicide or suicide attempts, significant reduction in incidents of self-harm or anxiety attacks, and some of this is self-reporting or parental reporting, I guess. I'm not quite sure where all this would come from. Documented improvement in related the health survey, and then increased engagement in activities. And I'll stop for a second to say that one of the things that I learned at the Washington State School Directors Association conference was a huge hot button, and again, when we met with the legislators, is this mental health issue, and I was beyond shocked by the numbers of how many of our youth in school are attempting suicide or actually succeeding in, high school, I'd sort of known that was an issue, but middle school and elementary school, the numbers are shocking. And I don't need to be telling you this, you probably already know, but again, I'm new. So it was something that I was not really prepared for, which is why I really was trying to think about what could those action steps be, because what do you do? Obviously, I know we've been trying. So seeking input from the principals, the teachers, the counselors, psychologists, nurses, and other relevant professionals to define the scope of the problem and provide viable strategies for how we could address it. It's going to be different in an elementary school than it is in a middle school or a high school. So I thought that was important. Engage community partners, and you'll always hear this a lot from me because I come from the community, so I really, but engage community partners to design and build a mental health safety net around each and every school. And I see that, I think the local health clinics that you've been, pushing and we've been talking about getting on, that's absolutely critical, but there's also a safety net of the community. And there've got to be places parents can go and other teachers can go for help to help these kids, and that we can refer kids to. Collaborate with local and state government, business, and other community partners to develop and implement the public awareness campaign, mainly because I didn't realize how ignorant I was of the severity of this problem. We've got to do a public awareness campaign, and it can't just be from us. It's not just a school district problem. So we have got to get with public health and get the state should, we can just get a funded public awareness campaign statewide around this issue. I think it's critical. And then I also think changing bell times would help the older students be less exhausted, less sleep deprivation. I think that's kind of a big issue. So that was my number one priority. My number two priority sort of relates, and it's mental health and safety in the sense that it's bullying. And I know that you guys, the staff, had suggested bullying was really a safety issue, but I think a lot of it is mental abuse, and the mental status of a child being bullied is really concerning to me, because I think then that leads to some of the self-harm, some of the depression, some of the suicides are kids that have been bullied. So it fits in both categories. So again, we can decide later where it goes, but I think it's a separate issue. And I know we've made some progress in this, so I'm thrilled to hear that. Data points, number of bullying incidents reported, number of student aggressors. These are the terms I learned at the conference. Is aggressors and survivors are the two things rather than victims. And so the student aggressors, number of student survivors, the age and grade level of the aggressors and the survivors, because sometimes it's peers and sometimes it's not. And then, benchmarks. I know we do anti-bullying training already, but it's obviously not deep enough and full enough maybe. So maybe 100% of the personnel interacting directly with students complete an enhanced comprehensive district anti-bullying training, which I'm going to show in the proposed action steps. I have a proposal for what we do for that. And then a reduction of bullying incidents over 2 years, and then I had 25% and 50% over 3 years. I don't know if that's realistic. I just can't imagine putting in a lower number because it's just not okay to have kids being bullied. So I'm not sure how to get to that number, but I know that we need to move in that direction. The proposed action steps would be, again, to seek input from principals, teachers, counselors, psychologists, and specialists about how to address it. And then find or create a comprehensive district-wide, culturally sensitive and age-appropriate bullying identification and anti-bullying strategy training. So because it's also happening in all levels of school, I think it's not the same training for everybody. The teachers that are working with elementary students are going to need a different one than the ones in high school. So we need to modify. And then find or develop a parent-family engagement strategy to help families address both their children being bullied and the parents of the aggressors who many times are in denial that their child could possibly be a bully. So I think we have a two level of training that we need to get going to the families. And my third priority is physical, and again, it's just like we were in the same mind here, but it's the obesity and the health one for kids. Focused on the Health Youth Survey, number of students who are obese by age, grade, school, and other demographic categories. Also, number of students who are seriously underweight. I think this is another problem that we have with anorexia and other things that can be missed. And I've seen that in several of my friends' kids that, they didn't see it coming, and all of a sudden it was a health problem. So I think we need to be cognizant on all ends of the scale. Obviously, the suffering from asthma, there's lots of county concern over that because it could be housing issues, it could be coming from a variety of different places that isn't just a simple answer. The number of students with diabetes, and then looking at the number of students eligible for free and reduced lunch, breakfast and lunch who are accessing those meals, and the community data on nutrition access deficits. In other words, fresh food deserts, the term, some communities, they don't have grocery stores really close by, and, to be able to buy fresh food every day, fresh vegetables. What are we doing for the schools in those communities to make sure that those kids are actually getting the fresh food and vegetables they need every day? And I'm sure we're doing that. I'm, again, speaking just from my
newbie.
As a newbie, and from my years of experience working in early childhood and knowing a lot of this stuff, and just making sure that we've had this conversation. So forgive me if I'm speaking to the converted over here, but and on this one I said we need to seek input from medical personnel, dietary specialists, nutritionists, and I've spoken with the folks that we just hired, this nutritionist. I've spoken with the group over Chris's team, and they're on top of this. They're very excited about what's going on with that, and I am too. So this is kind of, again, but again, we have to develop culturally appropriate strategies for schools and families to reverse the trend towards obesity and diabetes. And I think that is, again, not a job just for the school district. I think we have to do this in cohort with all of our partners that serve families in the community. I think I've heard targeting obesity reduction campaigns. A lot of schools around the country have been doing this challenges, where everybody, they do steps, they count, whatever, but it's an education, but it's also the whole school's involved. It isn't just saying these 3 children are obese, they need to do something. It's the whole school gets involved in exercise. And so I think maybe it's already happening. Again, I'm seeing Scott smiling at me. He's probably like, yeah, we've heard this. We're doing this. But I don't know know, so I'm just putting it out there. Again, provide appropriate professional development for all the appropriate staff. To make sure that personnel are watching to ensure children don't fall above or below the weight for their age. I think, when you live with someone, you don't see it. You don't necessarily see the weight gain or the weight loss, but if, school folks can, keep in touch with it too to make sure parents are tracking. Operationalize an innovational nutritional revisions to our food services, which I put in because I know we're doing it. So I think it's something it's new and the public may not be aware of it yet. But again, implement revisions to bell times, provide extra sleep for preteens and teenagers, because if you aren't getting a good enough sleep, then that totally impacts how your body consumes the calories that you are getting, and it could impact your ability to lose weight. So that's a huge issue without enough sleep. Encourage secondary school students to walk or bike to school, and I like our new bus program too. That's awesome. So I think that's important. Expand partnership with community partners like Metro Parks to enhance the number and diversity of options available for children and youth to participate in physical activities before and after school and during break times in school, like summers and other, free of charge or at a nominal fee. I'm sure that's something I know we've been working a lot on with them. So, and then I know we're only supposed to have 3, and I actually have 4 only because there's one that falls in a lot of the categories, but it's, bless you, but it's one that I've also been hearing a lot about, and I really want to make sure we address, and it's all categories: mental, physical, and safety, and it's basically the classroom and building climate. And this is really a staff-focused one. I mean, it is about the kids that are in the class that are being disruptive, and the kids in the class where there are disruptive children who are not learning because the class is constantly in chaos. But this is a significant impact, I know, on the teachers that have classrooms where they feel like they're constantly, because of the new discipline policies, they have to keep kids in the classroom even if they're being disruptive. There's a whole lot of limitations on how they can control that. And it's this chaos feelings that builds anxiety and stress among staff, as well as the kids who are not disruptive, but are trying to manage their anxiety of all the stuff that's going around in the classroom while they're trying to learn. So I think the data points would be percent of teacher requests for assistance in managing unruly students, the percent of discipline referrals, classroom-based versus other. So it can be out on the playground too, but I'm concerned to really focus on the ones that are happening in the classroom. Number of students by category, age, grade, classroom, school, special ed, McKinney-Vento, social, ethnic, racial, whatever, who reportedly disrupt their classrooms or programs. And then the benchmarks would be staff interacting directly with students in classrooms or programs, including transportation, because things happen on the bus, receiving training and strategies that we're going to develop below, and I'll get to that in the action steps. A 25% reduction in uncontrolled student outbursts, interruptions of classrooms in programs. Reported reduction in anxiety levels of other children in classrooms using mitigating techniques to reduce outbursts of disruptive students, and a reported reduction in anxiety levels in the staff, in classrooms using mitigating techniques to reduce outbursts of disruptive students. So my proposed action steps are to, again, seek input from folks like teachers, principals, counselors, psychologists, other professionals, about how to mitigate the number and intensity of classroom or program interruptions by student outbursts. And then I think the best way after we get the input is to find, and if it doesn't exist, create a set of strategies that our teachers, principals, nurses, and others working directly with kids can use to reduce the disruptive behavior in classrooms or programs through distraction techniques, containment, which is the problem, I know at this point, or actual shifts in behavior. And I think, anyway, so this one I think is, it's in all the categories, but I think it's where the staff is finding the biggest stress. And I hear about it all the time. So I just thought I'd throw it out there as a fourth one that's kind of floating across the top of all, and seeing if we can't figure out, while we're thinking about bullying, while we're thinking about anxiety and depression, and we're talking to superintendents and others, superintendents, principals, all the different players, if we can't also throw in something about how might we address this issue. I think it would be a proactive thing to do. So that's why I put in 4.
Right, thank you. Vice President Winsko.
So I'm glad you two went first because it triggered some things that I hadn't even thought about. So I'm going to kind of go backwards. So the fourth one you had about the staff, I found really interesting because I've always felt like stability of staff in a building is really important. So if everybody gets along and we have a really good staff, we see the scores go way up, even in our schools that have free and reduced lunch and ELL and other populations. I cite Stafford in particular, and they have had a very steady staff all along. So to actually monitor the stability or mobility of staff, so if you have 20 teachers leave a building in a year, and that has happened, I think that the district has to look at that and say, we have an issue here, maybe a leadership issue, maybe people aren't helping, the counselor or the other people who are there are not really helping out, and so it's not a good venue for the teachers. And I've seen teachers in tears in some buildings because things are so difficult to do, and I think we need to really respond to that. So thank you for bringing that up, because I do think that's really important. I also look at some of the, so I read both of your reports before, and you talked about psychologists and counselors. So psychologists really are in special ed, and they are testers, and that's what their job description is, correct? So they
they're
don't,
not the right-
yeah, they don't do psychology stuff, because they're too busy with the other, we have a Some limit. groups. Yeah, they're really busy.
They are working with students.
Yeah,
and
but they're basically kind of monitoring the special ed population.
They work with groups of students. We have schools that have really worked to get, sometimes it is counselor, but it is sometimes a psychologist that bring kids that have similar issues and bring them together to work on strategies.
Yeah, well, to know those job descriptions would be good, because counselors really have a preset set of curricula they do, but in some buildings they're more ad hoc, kind of responding to issues. So to really kind of know how we do that in our buildings, because some are different than others, so to know how they do and if they respond, and actually to hear from them, trends that they see, I think is really good. So when you talked about school activities, I had a friend whose daughter went to a high school in town, and she had come from a private school through 8th grade, and she was at the school for a semester, and not one single person spoke to her. No teacher, no other students, nobody said anything to her. Of course, she took her daughter out. So I think this whole thing about getting kids involved in activities is super important. And I feel like the teachers there needs to be an outreach sometimes. My daughter would have been really good at basketball if someone down in the hallway had said, come and try out. And I know there are people who have done that in sports and have actually gone to students and said, I want you to try out for my sport, or I want you to be on my debate team, or that personal touch, I think, is really important. One of the things we've done in middle school, and we've had these after-school activities, but the students, they go from group to group to group. So one week they go to one group, the next week they go to another. So the people who are providing those services, they never know who's going to come next. So to have them stick with something and maybe get a badge or something like that when they're done, I think that would be really important. But I think it's all about, they did a survey quite a few years ago, and they kind of took kids who were dropping out. What do you see as successful in school? It's the students who had activities all the time.
Busy.
Those were successful students, and they didn't feel like they themselves were successful students. So I think those were really good issues that you brought up. Also, I like the idea of a late start. My grandson is in the 7th grade, and he can't wait till 9th grade when he gets to go to school later. Right? So he was hoping that it'll all be done by then. I'm trying to think some of the other things you said. God, there were so many things that are Oh, when I went to Europe a few years ago, and they had a lot of English-speaking television, so I'm not saying that I saw this in other languages, but they had these public service announcements, and they had one on like 2- and 3-year-olds and what they were like for parents. You know, here's typical behavior, here's normal behavior. And you could, if we really looked at public service announcements for the bullying and depression and all that, you know, like you're saying, we can't do it all alone, and reach out to some of the television and radio stations. I think that would be good. And
Social media somehow would have to
Yeah.
help us with that. With kids.
Yeah,
That seems
yeah.
like they don't watch much TV.
Yeah,
Well,
Snapchat.
but some of the messages are to the parents.
Yeah, there are.
And-
there
Yeah.
are.
And then some of them, I mean, I think you have to have a multifaceted approach on this whole thing. It's not the same old public awareness we used to have,
No, that's right.
you know.
Sorry, I jumped in on
Yeah,
it.
no, that's
Sorry.
good. Because then you can say, okay, so that person on their internet or on their Facebook is saying, I have, you know, the fashions and jewelry, and my parents are taking me on this trip. And some of that stuff is not true. And, you know, if we could expose that and say, yeah, it looks really good, but their life isn't as exciting as they're putting out. So you are not losing out, you know? You're not keeping up with the Joneses. But that's an issue. And
It's a
I've heard
societal
speakers
issue.
about that. Yeah, I've heard speakers talk about that, the pressure. So when I look at safety and anxiety, I would like to know, because I've read a lot of articles nationally about our drills for gun safety, and is that having a negative impression on some of our younger students? And I have not heard that in Tacoma, but that could be. So I would really like to know when we have those drills, if it really stresses them out, and how often we have to have them, and
How often do we have?
I don't know.
the
So
gun-
that would be something interesting to know.
We have and I can't tell you what the number is. We have a number of drills we want you to complete by the end of the year. So it's not that we dictate
Fire,
when it
earthquake,
should be.
yeah.
But we ask you to have so many drills to show that you've got some automaticity with, meeting those
Behavior.
safety standards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And many of those drills are statutorily required.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Comes from the legislature.
Yeah,
But your specific question was like about active shooter drills?
Yeah, I think that frightens some of the children, but, I mean, I understand we have to know how to do that, but do we need to repeat it a lot? Does it cause anxiety? I just want to know.
Yeah.
I'm not making a judgment call, but, there's a lot of anxiety, and it happens when school starts, and in summers it calms down a little bit, and I think we have to, be sensitive to that issue. So, I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Director Cobb?
Usually I have to go first, so now I'm not, and I have a whole bunch of thoughts about what's already been said, so I think I'll start with a couple of those. So just in follow-up to a couple of comments that were already raised. One about school psychs. I'm in defense of school psychs because I had the opportunity to work with a handful of really awesome school psychs in the last couple of years. I think they would probably say that they have a broad set of skills, and their training allows them to do more than just review assessments of students with disabilities or students who've been referred for special education, but it's just a matter of how funding flows and how they're often deployed. So they might get pigeonholed as just being that, but I think in terms of like being members of problem-solving teams, they do provide expertise and data and are a really strong asset for thinking about how to review multiple sets of data, bring them together into informed decision-making for kids. So I think there's lots of potential in thinking through how our school psychs, our counselors, our nurses, and all of those educational service staff associates or whatever their OSPI designation, the ESA title, how all those people work together and you can leverage the strengths in their different scope of practice. And then also, just before I share my 2 priorities, so your 4th can compensate for my
awesome.
1, I just think, I continue to think that how we conceptualize some of what we're talking about really matters. So one of my priorities is, I don't know, they're lined up together. One, I'll just say is student discipline and continue to keep a focus on that. That's been a part of our existing safety benchmark and has made up the bulk of it. So as we've talked about bullying, which can become something that our students discipline for, and it shows up in the numbers of suspensions and expulsion, I think just broadly we've been framing our focus and our priority benchmarks around student discipline, but when I think about student discipline moving forward, it's still about equity and administration, so continuing to think about those discipline gaps. But it's also about, like you brought up, Director Bonbright, school climate, and having a better way of measuring school climate. For me, that goes beyond our climate surveys, like the ones that just went out. I worked in a place where and this gets, I guess, to potential action steps. I worked in a place where we did like quick pulse surveys, and it was like quick, but it provided really actionable data. So I don't know if there's a mechanism to think about our current platforms and using the fact that a lot of students do have phones, and if they don't have a phone, using something else. But how can we get more rapid, quick feedback from kids and adults in buildings to know how the climate feels and changes in it? And then family engagement and discipline. So I feel like a lot of the changes we've made to our discipline policy recently and our focus on closing gaps has the priority focus, and I think it's been in the right place, has been around equity and more equitable administration of our student discipline policies, or just the actions that adults take with regard to behaviors that students display. But I also think that there's another side to that, around making sure that families are engaged, families of students who are disciplined, but also families of students who were in the situation where they were the survivor of the discipline or a survivor of the behavior. We know that there are some barriers with regard to how we can communicate with families about the disciplinary actions taken when there are incidents, but I think that finding a way to ensure that there's equity in the way that the issue is handled in the beginning, and that people feel good, and I'm using the word feel, I guess, on purpose, but people feel good and have confidence in the fact that actions were taken to resolve the situation. And I think that there is some education that we need to do among the public and in the community, because even growing up here, you expected to be suspended for a fight. Like, that was the expectation. I got in a fight, or your friend got in a fight, they're going to be suspended. Like, that is like the operating system, I think, that people have still. Like, there's something bad happened, that student's going to be suspended. Or if my child was in a fight, I expect that student to be suspended. But I think that we need to do some education with families and members of the community to start to shift that expectation that there's going to be that visible, firm consequence. The student shouldn't be there the next day, because that is what we've moved away from that in terms of our responses to student behavior. So we need to catch people up on that. And there might be some pushback against it. I think there already is pushback against a change in that approach, but I think we need to be engaging in conversation with families and community about that shift and what it means, not only on the side of thinking about equity and righting some wrongs that have been historic in the pattern of certain students being disciplined more than others for similar behaviors, but also, you know what I'm saying, getting at the communication we need to do on the other end. So just to recap with that, I think keeping a focus on student discipline and maybe reframing it, because I think of the student climate as being a broader, school climate as being a broader concept than student discipline. Maybe discipline being an element of school climate, or like I said, I started my comments with that idea about how we conceptualize all these things matters, because it matters how you roll things up. Like, is discipline a part of school climate, or is discipline over here, and school climate is just how people feel and whether they're engaged? So how we talk about it matters, but those are the elements I'm getting at when I say discipline: the equity and administration, the overall school climate, and whether students feel safe, feel like the adults care about them, feel like they have good relationships with their peers, like their feelings about that, and then how we engage families on all sides of all of that. And then my other priority, and my action step is similar for my two priorities, so I'll save that till the end. But my other priority is student mental health. And this one and along with a lot of the other priorities that we've been talking about in the vein of student health and safety, I keep toggling back and forth between the prevention work that we need to do that impacts all kids, and the kinds of measures that we should be thinking about if we're thinking about our kind of universal strategies, or like the intervention work that we need to do that does not impact all kids, and the kinds of benchmarks and measures that we establish to get at the effectiveness and responsiveness of our intervention efforts. So I'm not sure where I land on benchmarks, but overall I think attendance is kind of a good marker to be more front and center for us, and attendance disaggregated by all the different categories that we've been talking through. And in terms of action steps for this one, and not necessarily for my focus on discipline, but action steps action steps for both. I think we need to talk to kids and have a real, like we talked about all the partners we need to reach out to, like a really serious, and I don't know if we engage our student reps, engage the student councils, that doesn't get down to the elementary level, and I don't know if these kinds of focus groups would get us into the realm of doing research or what this is, but I feel like we talk about student voice and engaging students a lot, and we even like in the rollout of the badging system and all that, we've said, okay, you're going to talk to students, right? But just hearing back, like doing this engaging in a real student engagement process around these topics that yield some real data. I'm really interested in that. Like we have partnerships that are in progress and on all these topics already. We have conversations that are being had among adults about problems and opportunities, but I don't know if we have like a real strategic plan for youth engagement around all these topics, around bullying, around mental health, and around school start times, around all of this. And I think that could really support us in moving forward on this benchmark area. And then lastly, I already kind of said it. Along with that, maybe this is kind of a second step in action. I think talking to students first, but then generating from that, like I said, some kind of pulse survey, something quick that is engaging and actually gives us data around school climate and how some of what we move to. The climate thing is really what I think about a quick survey, not the annual or biannual full school climate surveys that we do, but something more real-time and actionable. I want to make sure I didn't print, so I'm thinking about this from memory. Oh, yes, I'm glad I looked. The last thing on the mental health front is, and I think this speaks to a comment that Director Leon raised, like full implementation of our health curriculum. I know that we have lots of standards like ELA, math, social studies, all of the arts, science, health, financial literacy. Like there's lots of state standards, but I think ensuring full implementation of the health curriculum and identifying any supplemental needs, especially related to mental health or nutrition, I don't know, if we think it's necessary to get to the kind of outcomes that we need, I think would be a good step, building off of what we do. Like we teach the standards. So I think really honing in on making sure that, because health and safety or student health and wellness is a higher priority for us, making sure that we are fully leveraging the resource that we have in the high quality standards in the curriculum, and making sure that the curriculum is of high enough quality to teach those standards effectively, and supplementing if we need to. I think that is a really foundational start to this education that we want to make sure to communicate to students along the way.
Thank you. I'm going to piggyback on a couple of things that Director Cobb talked about before I get into my priorities. When you talked about student discipline and cultural competency, I've been thinking about what is the extent of our cultural competency training, and in particular, because we've heard, well, we had the mom that came and shared, or the family member that came and shared about the incident at First Creek, and specifically talked about concerns, just terms and approach as a Asian American, and then about a week later we got an email from an Asian family that expressed some similar concerns. And for me, I'm just curious, I don't know what we're doing in terms of cultural competency, which cultures and what competencies And how does that then relate back to discipline and some of those other incidents that are occurring at school, family engagement? So if we're not engaging, and mind you, it's anecdotal at this point based on 2 interactions that we've had as board members, but I would be interested to better understand across, the last I heard, we were 80, 85 different languages spoken. How are we, what are we doing strategically and tactically to engage with families with a cultural competency lens? And I would be interested to know what other school districts, if we could learn from other school districts that have similarly diverse populations, if there are lessons they've learned and actions they've taken as a result. So I took a slightly different approach. I think part of my challenge in doing this work was literally everything I started thinking about is interconnected. There are interdependencies, and almost none of it is singularly our responsibility. I think we feel a great sense of responsibility because we see these kids oftentimes in their most vulnerable forms, but almost every one of the things we're talking about we play a role, but we are not, I didn't see us necessarily being the lead. My top priority was mental health and specifically suicide prevention as the highest priority. I think we've been talking about mental health, and then Monday night, several of us were at the Pierce County school districts. All of the school board members and administrators from those districts met with all of the Pierce County state legislators. And just the sobering data, when you look at the Healthy Youth Survey and you see just the rate of despondency from high school seniors, that by the time you're a high school senior, and I think sometimes those numbers in the aggregate doesn't personalize it, but to have, for instance, the Sumner Bonnie Lake superintendent stand up and put numbers to those different ages and grades and actions that were taken. I don't know, I'm not a mental health professional, so I don't know if we're at a crisis, but it feels like if we're not at a crisis stage, we're very close to a crisis stage with our young people. And not just, high school students. I was in DC last year for the NSBA's Advocacy Institute, and we were on the Hill literally getting ready to walk into a meeting in Congressman Adam Smith's office, and a school board member from Issaquah got a message that an 8-year-old student that morning had committed suicide. So for us, in Tacoma to understand, what's the level of crisis. So I would be interested, certainly through the Healthy Youth Survey, but I wrestled with that's a lot of data in the aggregate that can be challenging to disaggregate and to identify specific students. So how do we look at, and this is where I look to the superintendent, referrals to school counselors, like what is some of the more immediate data that we can use to identify kids that are in crisis right now? Because that to me those are the students where we don't have time to systematize what we're going to do around mental health. And so what are we currently doing? What are the best practices? And that's not us. That's us, is there a training for teachers? Because when we get into who does the screening, I don't know that the teachers, for a variety of reasons, should be the screeners. So when we start to talk about screening for mental health, what are we talking about versus warning signs? Just like we educate teachers to look for signs of domestic violence, physical abuse, is there a way for us to train teachers to look for warning signs? But how do we begin to work with community partners to come in and do the assessment? I think engaging for the district to engage with mental health professionals in the district that could come in and create some sort of a system. Because it seems, and I don't know that we've GIS mapped, but there are a lot of resources available. It's in some instances just about getting kids and families connected to those resources. So what is our referral program? And how is it by catchment area? Because I can't imagine that it's the same throughout the city. So who are those mental health professionals that we could partner with? And my benchmark for that really was, I feel like we need to establish a baseline before I couldn't set reduction. The superintendent from Sumner Bonnie Lake on Monday said when she was presenting her data that we shouldn't accept anything above 0, which I would agree with. So it's hard for me right now to determine what would be any sort of a first step reduction benchmark without better understanding the baseline. And I think, I like the lens that she used, which was documented self-harm and the degree of self-harm. That seems to me, as a layperson, to be a good place to start. And then seeking, as we talk about next steps, I'd like to hear from mental health professionals. I hear all 5 of us acknowledge that mental health, youth mental health, teacher mental health, family mental health is a top priority. And so how do we, through the next study session or in a more formal setting, how can we have a collection of subject matter experts come in? Because I felt, as I started to get into action steps, I'm like, I am out of my lane.
Yeah.
I know I want kids to feel well mentally. I couldn't begin to articulate. I could guess. They were educated guesses, and I think you all did remarkably well. I mean, a lot of that stuff it makes sense to me, but I would appreciate an opportunity to hear from qualified mental health professionals that can give us guidance on the outcomes that we're seeking for our kids. And I think as part of that screening, and we've talked about it before, but our commitment to the Tacoma whole educator, understanding that there are teachers who themselves are battling mental health issues, and there are teachers who are working through issues related to teaching kids that have received, experienced significant trauma earlier in their lives. And I think those are, that's maybe more PTSD type, or I don't know how you'd qualify it, but I see a difference between teachers that may be experiencing depression versus what happens when you're exposed to those sorts of traumatic, or you're teaching kids who have been traumatized and you're on a daily basis, what does that lead to? And again, I would appreciate hearing from qualified mental health professionals on how we address that. And then family members. Kids, great. Something's going on in the home that's negatively impacting the student. How do we help? What's the intervention there? And that's where, to me, it gets really challenging, because what is our right to go into the home? That's where it really feels like this community-wide effort to make certain that if we think a kid is coming from a family that's experiencing mental health issues, what's the strategy and what are the tactics to address that? My second priority was bullying, and I just really struggle with bullying, and I've said this before, because I know we don't teach bullying in the school district, but I think it oftentimes manifests itself. I think sometimes behaviors by staff and other students fosters an environment. And I think the other uncomfortable part of this, I've been reading a lot of studies, and there are a couple of Yale University studies, and we talk about the aggressor and the survivor, but these Yale studies are talking about the person that experiences the bullying and provocations, and which I think that's really tough to start to talk about, because it, by no means would I suggest that, well, you got what you deserved. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting when you look at the data that starts to show behaviors. And I think about, as part of our, the good news out of all of that to me is that almost every study I read really emphasized social emotional learning. So I feel like we're at least ahead of the curve. We haven't perfected it, but we're ahead of the curve, because for a number of years now, we've been actively working to put social emotional learning curriculum in. And I wonder if that is the way to talk about with students things that may trigger a response so that there's a more general awareness. And I think especially with young boys, teenagers who tend to be more impulsive, our frontal lobes haven't formed. We're not as cerebral, and so we may be more responsive to that sort of antagonistic behavior. But again, I would invite experts on the subject to come in and share with us. And I, similar to Director Cobb, I just feel like we'd benefit from listening. I think a lot of times people come to us and they say, here's my problem, how are you going to solve it? We go, okay, well, superintendent, here's the problem, how are you going to solve it? And it's one-off, and even the data that we collect seems to be more quantitative, and I'd really be interested in that qualitative. And so how do we engage? You know, I would love a listening session around bullying, because I want to hear from the families that have been impacted, and then I would like to genuinely ask them what feels like the appropriate response from the school district, because we're in this paradigm now where we're trying to maximize the time that students are in school. So we're trying to significantly reduce or eliminate exclusionary practices. And if you have an expectation that if, you know, that kid punched my kid in the nose and then he was back in school the next day, I think having that honest conversation, mediated conversation, I would want to be sitting in an audience listening to a third party facilitate the conversation to say, what do you feel are the appropriate outcomes? Because I think we, on the one hand, are trying to keep more kids in school, but we hear from the parents, the families that feel like the recourse for those actions aren't just. They don't, you know, the punishment doesn't fit the action. And then from the students, I mean, I would be really interested to hear from a student's perspective, and I wonder, you know, we heard on Tuesday at our joint study session with the City Council and the Mayor's Youth Commission, and they had over 100 people initially sign up and are still like 75 strong. I'd be interested in there, and, you know, and we're getting ready to have a meeting at a yet to be determined date, but they reached out to us to have the meeting. Like, that to me is, I would love to have some sort of a youth commission endorsed approach to how we go out and have them tell us how we should go get information from students. Give that as a study problem for them to tell us, hey, we genuinely want to hear student perspective and student voice. How do we get that? And then help them set it up. If it's an invitation from the youth commission, from a peer on the youth commission to come and share, rather than, I don't know how excited most kids would be to come and talk to the school board, but if it gets messaged in a different way, the opportunity gets messaged in a different way for students on a peer-to-peer basis to be able to come in and have this conversation, and oh, by the way, the school board's going to be in the audience. I think city council, I think there are a lot of people a lot of elected officials that could benefit from just sitting quietly and listening to those students. I'd be interested in putting together, and I don't know if it's focus groups and multiple, or if it's one big, everybody goes to Mount Tahoma on a day, or we do it by catchment area. That I'm really open to how it works out, but I would love the opportunity to just sit and listen to students' perspective. What's it like? You know, I think we are, you know, certainly Director Leone and Director Cobb and I right now in the moment have students that are in the school, so I get their worldview. And Director Bonbright was recently in that situation, right? So we get our own kind of trials and tribulations of being a student right now, which helps, but I mean, that's a filtered snapshot. So I would appreciate an opportunity for us to create authentic listening sessions with students. And the third, and that was another one where established baseline data. So the priority for me was decrease incidents of school-based bullying, understanding that so much of these incidents are over social media, out in the neighborhood, where it's completely disconnected, and then, oh, now I see you eye to eye, right? So most of the bullying may have been out here, but then the recourse, the reconciliation happens when they get to school, but everything leading up to it has been outside. So I don't even know how we start to measure that, but that's just an observation that, you know, Snapchat, Instagram, I mean, even looking at, you know, gang activity and things that were happening on the east side and the south end, that so much of the gang activity now is over social media. And then there's a physical retaliation. So I just think that the world has changed, and for us to think about what do we do, whose responsibility is it when those students are out in the community, and then what is our role when they come onto our school property? And then my third priority was improve the quality of school meals. And feedback I've received is, and I thought it was really interesting, I was over at Lincoln, I spent some time over there, and I've heard it from other people as well. You know, I really appreciated the concerted effort the district made at the beginning of the school year to try to get more students and families signed up for free and reduced lunch. And the feedback has been interesting that students, they don't like the food. I mean, we've heard it, you know, from time to time, students come, but they just don't, you know, to have hungry students say, I think I'll pass, to me is, we got to stop and figure that out. And I think, you know, over the years, there's a variety of things I think that have factored into that. Federal policy, where they changed, you know, your pizza's got to have whole wheat crust, and you got to take a milk, and we have cultures and ethnicities in our schools that they don't drink cow's milk. Well, you're going to take your cow's milk. You're going to, you know. So I think trying to come up with creative ways to improve the quality of the food, but that to me is creating healthy food that the kids will eat. So again, interacting with the students, you know, we had the young man from Sammy come up and say, you know, we get this cold salad every day, and so one of the things, and I don't know, I mean, this really is, I think, me being the good idea fairy, which I try to tamp down in other people, and here I am guilty of it, but this has been a district of innovation, and I am interested, you know, one of the things that came out of my conversation at Lincoln was they have students that don't eat the food. They have, one of the counselors shared with me that, you know, Asian students that want hot soup for lunch, they want pho for lunch, they want ramen for lunch. And so I wonder, you know, when you have small businesses in the Lincoln district especially, that's what they do, how do we figure out a meal is a meal on a card is a meal on a card? Is there a way to pilot working with local business, so rather than the meal price that we pay going to a vendor that trucks us their stuff from New Jersey, could we come up with a meal solution that the kid wants to eat, where the money goes to the benefit of a small business? I don't know how you put that together, but it feels to me like if any district could start to pilot something like that, I don't know that it's applicable citywide. I don't know how, if you're, you know, when we talk about some of these food desert or areas that don't have restaurants, but I think certainly trying to be creative. And again, my thought is it's not us simply alone trying to solve the problem, that it's not just about Chris Williams and Nutrition Services and our new nutritionist, like that's the only way to create things that kids want to eat. I think starting from what would you like to eat, and then having the conversation that you can't eat bacon double cheeseburgers every day, because that starts to defeat Dr. Leone's, you know, Director Brombright's obesity and some of the, like, no, you can't, you got to negotiate. But to me, if a kid says, you know, Principal Irwin was talking about that there's a popular burrito truck, right? If we can work with local restaurants to put together a school-friendly meal, and Lincoln's an open campus, and those kids can go and purchase a meal, I would be really interested in exploring those options. I would be really interested in us exploring, was it NSBA a couple of years ago, and some of those larger food vendors now are trying to play a role in the farm to fork. And so less of the product is getting shipped cross country, that they're really trying to work with more local vendors, local farmers, organic farmers. I would be interested in us doing more scratch cooking. I would be interested in us really, I think we probably have met the technical requirements for macronutrients of carbohydrates and protein and fat. I think I would be interested in us seeing how we could create healthier options. You know, I don't know if we still do French toast on a stick with a thing of high fructose corn syrup, right? I mean, those to me are low hanging fruit, I guess pun intended, where we could try to really start to swap out, hey, you're coming in, because I loved the promotion my kids were talking about. Hey, they're doing a eat breakfast at school contest and they're giving away all sorts of stuff. Great. What are we feeding them? Something that's going to elevate their blood sugar, right? And then all of these, so now the kid has done right by going for the meal, and we've elevated blood sugar, and they go into first period, and maybe that's what creates behavioral problems. And now by third period, they've crashed, and they're not really interested in what we're serving for lunch. I'd like us to dig into some of those things, because that, again, then what that kid eats when he's not at school, beyond our control. And so we can teach habits, but control what we can control is what are we serving students for breakfast and lunch and snack and whatever we're providing them. And then having specifications. You know, I appreciate teachers that granola bars, you know, they're to me, it is societally, it's shameful that teachers have to go and buy supplemental food. But the reality of the world is there's hungry kids showing up. And we know we've got kids that eat their last meal at school on Friday and don't eat a whole lot over the weekend and come in ravenous on Monday morning. So I will stop my diatribe on nutrition, but I do think that there's an opportunity for us. I think, you know, I've had conversations over the years with nutrition services workers and get from them an interest in doing more scratch cooking. I think we still in Tacoma claim to have more community gardens per capita than any other city in the United States. Well, great. How are we turning those into soups and salads and sides, and how do we harvest it to the benefit of our kids and families? Director Cobb.
I'll just say on this topic from the perspective of competition, I watch the news in the morning, and especially on Q13 Fox, they tell you what's for lunch in the various districts, and I'm always like, oh, it'll be like teriyaki chicken and something in Seattle, and then it's chicken nuggets in Tacoma. I'm like, we've got, like, I haven't been in schools to eat lunch recently, but just from like a perception standpoint,
Yeah.
It does typically seem that our selection is like the typical, stereotypical school lunch. I know that we've made some progress and are working on things in nutrition. We had a lot of discussion about our meal pricing structures too recently, and we hadn't increased them in several years. I think it was 6. So I know that there's been progress in that area, but I think it's one where we need to keep moving forward, and hopefully our new nutrition staff will help. But I think more broadly, just thinking more innovatively about partnerships, if they're feasible, given all the federal food and school lunch program and all the other program standards. But even if it's not feasible, how do we, like you said, fully maximize the kitchens that we have? How do we staff in ways that help facilitate this? How do we engage students again in conversations about the selection and what they will eat, and getting them to want to eat it, so that price-wise we can achieve some economies of scale or some efficiencies because kids are eating. I think thinking about it holistically might be a way to get there, but it's an area I too think that need movement on.
Yeah, and you know, for some of these, like I just thinking about if we could even figure out how to put a meal card as a meal card in Lincoln that could get a kid to eat something at a local restaurant to the benefit of that local small business. But when I was at Foss last year, and their culinary program was talking about wanting to put together a food truck, right? So if we encounter some of these areas where maybe there aren't a plethora of restaurants to choose from, could we, and just the Foss folks talking about the preparation of the food, the business, financial literacy, we've been hearing about that lately, and just how do you put together a food truck and how do you price I just think that there's ways for us to be creative that would have a lot of benefit. So what
Can I make a comment?
Sure, I didn't know if you were pointing at Carla
Well,
or if
I
you were
kind of
raising
was
it.
because
Director Bombright.
couple things. One, I've had the pleasure since coming on of doing the tour and meeting with each of the cabinet members, and met with Chris and his team are in charge of nutrition, and they talked about a lot of innovative things that they're currently doing along the lines of what you're talking about. So I don't know if the superintendent's ready to talk about that, or maybe in the next, maybe we can have Chris and his team come to tell us what they're doing. But I was pretty excited about what I was hearing. So I think they're being super responsive. And I think some of these ideas, I love the idea of the food truck being an actual financial responsibility, build a business model. I mean, there's lots of things we could do to make things creatively serve multiple purposes. I also just wanted to say that a lot of you have said, but I think, thank you, Director Cobb, especially for mentioning student voice, and I really liked what you said, Director Hines, about having a listening tour, and I think that I hope that's something we can pull together, but first of the year. I don't want to wait on it. I think we really do need to get student opinion about a variety of things, and maybe what we could do between now and then is figure out what are the key topics. Obviously, mental health. And maybe one of the things we get out of tonight, I know we don't have too much more time, but what we could maybe get out of tonight is what are the, it sounds just like we're very unified in terms of what our priorities are. We all said mental health in some capacity, and obviously physical health is the nutrition piece, and then the discipline, which is the, bullying and my number 4, which was really climate. So we all talked about all of those things, and is there a way we can get some closure tonight on how staff can, look at how best to tackle this, get people to come into our next meeting with input, and or my last piece is just student input. I really love that idea.
On that topic, when you just rattled off the list, in terms of like giving, especially secondary students, they need choice and they want to weigh in. So giving them a choice of like several options of conversations to participate in.
Yeah.
Like if there were 4 conversations happening in your building over whatever time and you got to choose, I want to talk about school climate or mental health, bullying or whatever, like giving kids a chance to kind of vote with their feet where they want to go, what conversation they want to be
I
a
love
part
that
of.
idea.
Like, I don't know where it happens or when it happens, and I know, like you just said, the first every year, but I don't know when and where, and if it's every comprehensive and invite Sammy and Soda an idea over, or whatever,
Yeah.
but, and how we engage the middle school students, because I think they're primed and ready to have, like, these conversations, too. But I think that doing it in a way where they get to choose and we focus it a bit might be a nice thing. But again, I'm not trying to get all in your lane, but
So given-
idea-wise,
Wait, can I
it'd
ask
be
one
great.
technical
Well, I
question?
just want to, yes, can I come back to you in a minute?
Okay.
I just want to give, mindful of our time. So you've heard the data and idea dump from the board. We do have a study session on this topic scheduled for January 16.
Okay.
How can we leverage the last few minutes tonight? What do you need going forward, Superintendent? I mean, what are you're sitting over there patiently listening to all of us rattle off what we think are the priorities. So I would be interested to hear your response to those priorities, and then what you may need from us to start to winnow down or coalesce so that we can continue to move the conversation forward.
I don't think I can answer your question well. What I can say is that many of the things that you talked about that you wanted, we're working on. So it's not this blank slate that we haven't started to work on. As far as narrowing it down and deciding what you want to focus on, that's important. But I think you need to do that. What I can do, what we can do is, take a look at our 4 goals and, see where the alignment is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in starting 8 new projects. I'm just going to be honest. And, what you've put on the table is every single idea I heard, I felt like was credible and would make a difference. But we can't do it all. We had meetings in cabinet this week about personnel that are saying, hey, I picked up 3 more jobs and I don't know how I'm going to do it. And are you going to raise my classification so that I get more pay? And so I'm just being realistic about, I heard you say a lot about training, adding training, and, talking to teachers. So what the things that you mentioned, I totally agree with, but they take resources, and they take resources of actual, money, budget, and they take resources of time, and they take resources of leaderships, people willing, to lead. So I think we have to be really cognizant of where's the bang for the buck, what's going to get us the most, where can we go the furthest, and to also look at, do talk to Chris and say, okay, if one of our main priorities is to, make the quality of lunches better, how far are we down that road, and what efforts would it take to push it to the end? Survey, I like the ideas of doing some short, quick pulse points to say, where are we really? And, what does it look like? And getting those data points. And, our teachers are survey weary, but if we can figure out ways, to give them just a pop. I like the idea of getting out and, talking to kids, because I think they do have a lot to offer. Getting it done by the first of the year.
Well, I didn't
We can't pull that off. I'm going to be realistic. I got staff here, and I got to make sure that I'm cognizant, of what they can do. So you didn't mention anything that's not important and that I can't get behind, and that I think that we should. What I'd like to see us do is how many of those things can we blend in with our efforts that are already in place, and enhance it and make it better, and maybe add a component of it that we can get to. And then, then it becomes, it's the same thing when we go to our teachers and say, we want you to weave in these components of reading. It's important to me that I don't say, hey, got a whole new reading program for you to do, but instead I say, hey, we've really learned that these 4 components make reading better. Let's look at how you can slide it into what you're already doing, because nobody's in a point where they're saying, yeah, I can take on 10 more things.
Director
And
Baumbright,
we need time to process it too.
Right.
that's fair. Director Baumbright, you had
Yeah,
a technical question?
Yes, I did. And that is one of the things we were talking about, getting student voice. And you mentioned bringing in Sammy and Idea and Soda. And I was thinking it would be in the evening, maybe at one of the schools. But then that's true. It's at one of the schools, which isn't necessarily convenient to the other kids from across town. So what is our technical capacity to do kind of different locations, headquartered here, and having one TV going to Foss and one TV going to Wilson, and one I don't know what the technology is, but it seems like we could generate a conversation across the district, and I don't know if that's possible, but I just throw it out there. It might make it easier. It might make it more complicated.
And perhaps with the youth commission, maybe they could be representatives of their schools. They meet monthly.
That's a type of
I really want, I think who you want, I hear you. If you've talked and worked with the youth commission, they're cream of the crop.
Yeah, they're go-getters.
Top kids. And I'm not saying that's bad, but we want the kids.
Yeah.
Kids.
When I mentioned that, I envisioned like a conversation over an hour-long class period at the school, and maybe it's and I don't know, like and maybe facilitation-wise, I don't think like a teacher or a principal or anybody from that building should be facilitating the conversation necessarily if we want to really get real input from kids. So, but I imagine it being school, but not having kids having to not travel. And if you want to hear the conversation, you be in the room for the conversation.
And I think it might be, like I said, I haven't processed it yet, but it might be a great place for some of our community partners, to come in and, talk to different classes. And you want it random, and you want it real, and you want kids who are, that are really giving you, their opinion and a broad spectrum of the kind of kids that go to school.
Dr. Garcia?
I'm going to also defer to our resident medical expert. A lot of the things that you spoke to are connected because nutrition impacts our mental state impacts. I was sharing with someone, it can be very frustrating having this conversation because we want to get to action, but I don't know of a board that is going as deep. And you're just now unraveling some of the complexities that all this stuff is connected to each other, and there is no simple answer. And it's really hard to prioritize where you start. But I would push on you to say we're not probably into a place with which of those four things, although they are connected, where would you like to start? Because the way I understand the process is we're moving to a work study on nutrition. We haven't even had a chance to share with you. So what are those efforts? And so our
But that could be that could inform a study session.
Absolutely.
Chris, you have 15 minutes of a 90-minute session to give us an update on what you're working towards, because I think there's a lot of information out there here, with the superintendent said that we just don't know what we don't know.
Absolutely.
So how do we
And those big
know it
ideas,
better?
if we're going to make a systematic, meaningful change, will take several conversations and deep learning, and then bringing in some of those community partners and then exploring and piloting. And so we really do need you to say, yes, these four things, and they are all connected, but we've been talking and working and discipline over the years. We've been working on improving nutrition over the years. Which one would you like us, under these current conditions, to start with to go deeper? And that's what's really fun about our district, it being a continuous improvement district, is it's not an acknowledgement because we haven't had a chance to share with it, those that nothing is happening. But now we're surfacing this question amongst us as an agency to say, where are we going to decide to go deeper? Mental health, we have not been able to have a chance to really say, so what do we all mean by mental health? We've talked about interns, and so if that's the one that you would like to choose to start with, then I think we have to really start to frame out what is our shared meaning about mental health, and who are the resident experts that we can learn from, and what are our current efforts that we're trying, and who are we partnering with. But I would be cautious about doing mental health and then bringing in another conversation around bullying, unless we're saying we want to go through the lens of bullying and see how that's the mental health aspects and how we're going to improve them. And I think that's what you said, is who are the students being impacted first, and working there. And I hear the superintendent saying, and if we're going to talk about nutrition services, then let's talk about those students that are qualifying free and for reduced lunch, and those ones that are getting their nutrition meals versus Josh, who may never buy a school lunch other than a random opportunity here and there.
Director Cobb and then Director Leon.
Hearing the question of like where do we need to go, I lean in even further on this topic of just asking the kids, like just telling them what we're trying to do and what we're trying to figure out. And if we go to all 5 comprehensive high schools and have an hour-long focus group conversation with 25 kids and then we see a common set of themes across all 5, I feel like that tells us where we need to go. In some ways, like there's other considerations that we should make around other information that we have access to, but I just think that we're sitting on a little bit of if the ultimate goal is to improve the way students feel while they're with us and to improve their engagement and interactions with one another in an effort to improve their mental health and improve their engagement with school, there's probably some nuggets right there. Like they're like, if this was just, and it's like if this was just thing, that we're like, oh, we weren't close enough to see it.
There's 5 of you, and there's 5 comprehensive high schools. There's more than you can even hit. There's no reason why all 5 of you have to do everything the same. You could have the same questions and say, we're struggling with these 4 big priorities.
Kind of protocol.
Which one do you think we should, and why?
Yep.
And then bringing that back to help guide your decision to say, well, this is what students are saying to us, and this is what I learned, and we could help facilitate that. That might be a powerful place for you to get some
Yes.
those nuggets and frame a consistent set of questions and asking, give us 25.
And I think we have to go beyond the 5 comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. I was just,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Sure.
I was just saying that right in the
But we
moment.
each
but-
have assigned areas, so we can.
with a set of like a semi-structured not interview, but conversation starter. And for me, it's like, okay, this is an opportunity. Whoever wants to come. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
I think we probably need to do it during the day at the
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
And we can help facilitate that with those big 4 ideas that you just mentioned
Yep.
that are connected, and say, teach us what's most important to you and why. And why is that more important than this?
and if we can be aided by a note taker, that'd be great.
Sure.
We could definitely do
We can
that.
do
I think
that.
that would be extremely powerful to hear
Yes.
from them in a consistent
you.
fashion.
So would you share what you heard as the 4?
I would, if you'll
You just
indulge me, I
referenced
would
4.
love for the Director Bonbright to recapture the 4 that and that's what I was leaning on.
Because they were pretty much each.
So
of- You wanted me to just say it again?
Sure.
Okay. So the social emotional, the mental health, which is suicide prevention, anxiety, depression, and social emotional concerns, is one. The second one is bullying, and discipline and other things that fall within that piece. The third one is physical health, which is the nutrition and all of those pieces. And then the fourth one is this classroom and building climate. And Director Cobb had kind of merged those, because again, they really go, they're all intertwined. But that was just the one I didn't want to lose, because that's where we get the staff as well in a big way.
So is it reasonable as we think about January 16th, knowing that we're not going to get out to schools, to have 20-minute presentations on each of those topics to better understand what's happening?
From staff, you mean?
Yeah. To have Chris or designee to come in and talk about nutrition, to better understand what are we doing around bullying and mental health, to give us high level, because I know there's work that's occurring, and I think there's a disconnect because we're not at the board level aware of what is occurring.
We can, we can work to do the best we can to give you a high level of those 4.
Does that work?
There's very few work days, between now and that day. So, if you can allow the presentation to be high level based on the amount of days that the staff actually has to pull it off.
With an also an understanding is in 20 minutes, we're just going to dip our toes in the water of just kind of a rundown, a 101 to spur further conversation. But you also probably won't be in a place where you're able to ask questions, right?
Well, I think it would be interesting, and maybe school climate isn't one for that study session. Maybe that's a different conversation, but I would really like to better understand what we're doing around mental health and suicide prevention right now, because that one to me is pretty much non-negotiable. If we have kids in crisis, I want to know what we're doing, right? That's not one. Quality of meals can get better. The quality of meal is probably not going to determine if someone lives or dies. So just my impression, my opinion on some of these, if we're going to prioritize, is mental health and suicide prevention, because I think there's kids probably right now that are contemplating, and I would like to better understand what the district does and where the district needs help, so we can go to community partners and say, this is what our kids are experiencing, and this is where we need help from you, so that it doesn't default to 100% TPS staff responsibility. Thoughts?
Yeah.
Director Leon?
So I'll come back a little bit.
I also note, just for the record, it's 7:37.
Okay, I'll be brief. So I am reassured and encouraged and proud of all those work that we're doing here, and know that you've got your cabinet and all the staff here. You've got the intellect, you've got the caring people in this district to make these improvements. We should try to aim for zero, suicides, zero severe depression. We're going to have some depression at some levels, no matter what is done, right? This is a public health emergency. So you're wondering, is it or not? Do we qualify it? It is. So this is the Journal American, the JAMA article, American Medical Association this week came out saying, again, third year in a row, that the lifespan goes down in America compared to other developed countries. You've probably all seen that. And it goes down, the worst age ranges it goes down in is young adults, which come, and some of that is teenagers and middle-aged adults. And most of it is from substance abuse, depression, suicide, drugs. We're not in the worst part of the country. The worst part of the country is the center of the country for where it's getting bad, but it's bad here too. So we are at an emergency state for mental health. So we're excited that we're acting here. We're already doing good things, so we'd like to hear what's already happening that's good and expand upon that. I do think we'd like to get guidance from you, Superintendent, on what is feasible, because you've told us these are all worthy endeavors, but your team knows best as to what are we closer to that we can bring it over the line with less effort and less money and resources. We don't want to burn out staff doing this, but we know that how important this work is. So it would be helpful to get what are those low-hanging fruit topics that we can put more emphasis behind. So the student voice piece is really important. How we do that, I think, can be debated. But I think it's some possibilities would be at school events that are already happening, right? You've got people already there. Coalescing and bringing people to a new event is going to be difficult. So let's figure out ways to do it during school hours, school events, games, concerts, whatever it may happen. But guess what? For 15 minutes, we're going to talk about something before you have the concert or before you have the football game or whatever it may be. That may not work, but just an idea. Okay. All right. So let's stay focused. I know right now we're not focused. We've got lots of good ideas, but eventually we're going to need to focus down. And I still want to advocate. I sent out, and if we can make it part of the record, some information on school-based health centers and really the impact it has for low cost and ways to get at depression, anxiety, and delayed start times. Really, that touches so many of the things we've talked about today. So those could be possible parts of the solution, not all of them. So.
All right, closing thoughts, Director Cobb?
I just continue to think that we need to keep talking, especially about how we talk about all of this, getting clearer about what we mean when we say certain things. And I think it's a great idea to engage students in this conversation and to do, each of us go out and do that, come back together to share the themes that we heard and to see where the commonalities are and using them as our informants on this work.
Director Bombright.
I would just like to say that I am super proud to be part of this team and really amazed at how alike the thinking is and how dedicated everyone seems to be, and to thank the superintendent and deputy superintendent and all the staff here at Tacoma Public Schools for the hard work you do every day. And I know, we were the little good idea fairies, and don't worry about bringing reality in. It's important, but I also think that that's how innovation happens. And so thank you for allowing us to do this. I know it's always a stress on staff when they think, oh, what's the board going to do now? But they're lucky they have a board that wants to do stuff, and we want to make a difference. So we can do it together. So thank you.
That's good.
Right. Superintendent, any closing thoughts?
No, we'll work to see what kind of high-level things we can bring on a January 16th meeting.
Okay, sounds good.
So just real
Dr.
clarity,
Garcia.
are we focusing on the three or the one? I heard you make a suggestion to the board that we were focusing in on mental health.
For the topic on the 16th?
Yes, that I heard, and maybe I'm paraphrasing or I'm assuming is that I heard a recognition that that learning about that one first over the physical health and there, that was that a proposal, or are we focusing?
I was
on
just
the
throwing
third?
it out. I was saying as we're trying to prioritize that, to me, one that literally could mean the difference between life and death over how do we make the hamburgers taste better is in my pragmatic sense.
Agree.
Yeah, I think we all
With
agreed
the-
with that. I think the question was, what is the
Fantastic.
topic for the 16th? So,
Well, that's what we're talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
is it mental health for the 16th? And as a standalone topic, is that what you're suggesting?
I'm
Or
trying
you're
to,
trying to clarify?
yeah, I'm not suggesting.
So for the 16th,
Because-
are we in agreement that we would like to hear a presentation on what's happening with mental health?
yes, and if there's things that fit the other categories and there's time, I mean, maybe we could just make it a little longer of a meeting. I don't know, I'm just thinking that it would be good to hear what we're doing. We don't know what this district's
Yeah, I think
doing.
we're probably going to have to provide more specificity. So mental health, and then is there one or two additional topics, Director Cobb?
And the resources, there's no central resources of
That's what I'm
dealing
saying,
just with mental health.
Right.
Well-
And so it means it means the staff has to
Figure it out.
determine, who's doing it in different places and bring them together.
That's what I was
So
saying.
it's not, I can't go to my mental health czar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think for us to better understand, what do teachers do if they think they have a student in their class who's in crisis?
Yeah.
Have they been trained? Do they have a screener? What's the referral
And there
process?
will
How
be
do we
different-
contact the family?
There will be different
right?
answers to
Yeah.
that in different
Right.
schools, because different schools have different
Yeah,
processes.
so I think we need to start to unpack that so we can figure out how we can be
Yeah.
helpful. And Director Cobb.
To the point about what we've heard in that presentation, I think generally I'd want to come away with a sense of what we do from a prevention standpoint, what do we do from an intervention standpoint, like when there's a crisis, and then who's involved in terms of like partnerships that exist and what roles do they play, and then what data do we currently have. Those are some things that I think through the presentation I'd want to be takeaways
Okay.
or clarity
And-
around.
and
All right.
I think
I'm
there's
sorry,
a.
Director Leon.
And there's suggestions for improvements
Right.
from those same people.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Director Bombright?
And I was going to say there's a through line. So if someone feels like bullying is a big part of mental health, then bring something on bullying. If it's not, if you aren't doing something in that area, then. But if it's,
And there'll be some intersections.
that's what I'm thinking.
yeah.
I think all of
Yeah.
those are mental health related, except
Yeah.
for maybe the school lunches, but everything else is.
And in our, Director of Student Life, they set safety plans, they work
Mm-hmm.
with committees. We can certainly talk about some of the work that's going on there.
Perfect.
I heard a
Dr. Garcia.
framework, I want to make sure I capture is, I heard prevention, intervention.
I think I ask about who's involved in the partnerships
Thank
and
you.
what everybody, what
Partnerships
role they
and
play,
data.
and then data.
And then I heard one last one is what would be next? What should we consider next to get better?
And maybe one of the partners, a Greater Lakes person or comprehensive mental health person, that might be.
Let's have this opportunity to, under the theme of when we identify a student in crisis,
Yep.
what are we doing for
Happens here.
prevention, intervention? Who are partners that we're currently in work? What kind of data, and what do we wish we could do more of?
Yeah, there you go.
And
that fair?
Hearing this topic is 90 minutes. Is that a 90-minute topic? Will you need the full 90 minutes to, so if we just now identify the 16th will be a study session on mental health, suicide prevention in the district. And then we can figure out how to schedule times to get,
Forgive me here. I heard originally you say students in crisis, and I know you've said suicide prevention a couple of times. And so I just want to make sure that we're meeting your expectations. Are we focusing in on crisis as when students are talking about suicide, or in what we're talking about when we see students in crisis?
Director Cobb, when you said prevention and intervention, what did you mean?
I was working under the frame of mental health
So
broadly,
preventing,
like some mental health crisis, like students who are in some kind of mental health crisis, whatever
Okay.
that is.
and
Anxiety,
I took,
depression.
okay. and I took
Anxiety,
prevention
different
Yeah,
depression or
I like
suicidal
that.
ideation,
Right.
Whatever it is. Like,
So that's
yeah.
broader than just suicide.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify why we are all here together.
I'm good with that. As long, I'm interested in the immediate crisis, and I hear Director Cobb talking about a broader, so if staff is prepared, I would welcome an opportunity to hear those additional things that may be challenging students.
Thank you for
Broader
that
is better, I
patience.
think.
Yeah. Okay, so we're in agreement for the 16th, and then as we move forward, we'll also give the superintendent and the deputy superintendent time to digest everything from today. We are scheduled to meet again next Thursday, December 12th. That will be our final business meeting for 2019. Anything else for the good of the order? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, team.
Really steward diplomas. I always feel bad for these kids that get my chicken scratch. It's fun to sign.
You're talking.